Welcome, traveler, to the place where everything began. Stand with me here on the sun-baked plains between two great rivers, where 5,000 years ago, humanity asked a question that would change everything. What if we stopped wandering? What if we built something that would last? The answer to that question rises before us now, in towers of mud brick reaching toward the heavens, in streets teeming with 40,000 souls, in the scratch of reed stylus against wet clay, recording thoughts that would echo through millennia. This is Sumer, and nothing that came before prepared the world for what emerged from these marshlands. Think about this. Every city you have ever walked through, every law that has governed your life, every story written down for future generations, every wheel that has ever turned, every hour divided into 60 minutes, all of it traces back to this very soil. The Sumerians did not simply build a civilization. They invented the very concept of civilization itself. But here is what makes this story truly extraordinary. These people had no blueprint to follow, no earlier example to copy. They faced the raw chaos of nature, the unpredictable floods, the scorching summers, the threat of neighboring peoples, and from that struggle, they forged something unprecedented. Cities like Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash became the first places on earth where strangers lived together under shared laws, worshipped in monumental temples, and recorded their triumphs and failures for posterity. What we are about to undertake together is not a glimpse or a summary. This is the complete journey through humanity's first great civilization, from its mysterious origins in the reed-choked marshes of the Ubaid period, through the revolutionary invention of writing, the rise of legendary kings like Gilgamesh, the brutal wars between city-states fighting over water and glory, the shocking conquest by Sargon of Akkad, who built history's first empire, the dark years of foreign occupation, the glorious Renaissance under the third dynasty of Ur, and finally, the slow transformation as Sumer's flame passed into Babylonian hands. We will walk through ziggurat complexes where priests communed with gods named Enlil, Enki, and Inanna. We will watch scribes in tablet houses teaching young students the intricate art of cuneiform. We will witness merchants trading lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan and cedar from the mountains of Lebanon. We will stand in the death pits of Ur, where servants followed their queen into eternity adorned in gold. Every triumph, every tragedy, every innovation that shaped the world to come awaits us in the episodes ahead. If you find yourself drawn to these complete journeys through ancient worlds, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a lost civilization, told from its first breath to its final legacy. Now, let us begin our journey in the misty marshlands where the first permanent villages took root, where humanity first dared to dream of something greater than survival. The land breathes water. Reeds taller than any human stand in endless ranks across a world that belongs neither to river nor to earth. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, where two great waterways slow and spread across flat alluvial plains, a labyrinth of marshes stretches toward the horizon. Channels twist through beds of papyrus. Islands of mud rise barely above the waterline, then sink again with seasonal floods. This is southern Mesopotamia, around 5,000 years before the Common Era, a place of extraordinary abundance hidden within apparent desolation. Fish swarm through warm shallows in numbers beyond counting. Wild fowl darken the sky at dawn and dusk. Date palms cluster on higher ground, their fruit falling into waters thick with life. The marshes offer everything a small community might need for survival, and scattered bands of people have learned to read this watery landscape with intimate precision. Their homes rise from the reeds themselves. Bundles of marsh grass, bound and bent into graceful arches, form structures that seem to grow organically from the wetland. These reed houses possess remarkable durability, their curved forms shedding rain while allowing air to circulate in brutal summer heat. Families cluster on artificial islands built from layers of reed matting pressed into mud, platforms that must be constantly maintained against the patient erosion of water. This is the Ubaid period, named by modern archaeologists for a small mound where distinctive painted pottery first emerged from the soil. The people of this era leave no written records. Their voices are forever silent, yet their artifacts speak across millennia with surprising clarity. The pottery tells a story of increasing sophistication, vessels shaped by hand, then fired in simple kilns, bear geometric patterns and dark paint against buff clay. These designs spread across hundreds of kilometers, appearing at sites throughout southern Mesopotamia with remarkable consistency. Something connects these scattered communities, trade networks perhaps, or shared religious practices, or simply the movement of skilled craftspeople carrying their techniques from settlement to settlement. At Eridu, considered by later Sumerians to be the oldest city in the world, a small shrine stands on virgin soil. Offerings of fish bones accumulate in its corners. This modest structure, rebuilt again and again over centuries, each version slightly larger than the last, marks the beginning of temple architecture that will eventually produce the great ziggurats. The pattern establishes itself here in the marshes, a sacred space, a community gathering around it, offerings given to powers beyond human understanding. The transformation happens slowly, measured not in years but in generations. Some communities begin to dig channels, directing water from natural courses toward fields cleared from reed beds. Barley grows in the rich silt. Wheat follows. The unpredictable bounty of hunting and gathering gives way to the more reliable, if more laborious, rhythms of agriculture. Irrigation demands cooperation. A single family cannot dig and maintain the channels necessary to water substantial fields. Groups must work together, coordinating labor across planting and harvest seasons. Someone must decide when channels open, when they close, how water divides among competing claims. Authority structures emerge from practical necessity. The marshes do not disappear. They remain, providing fish and fowl and reeds for building. But alongside them, a new landscape takes shape. Fields of grain, orchards of date palms planted in deliberate rows, villages growing larger as agricultural surplus supports populations that hunting and gathering could never sustain. Mud brick appears, shaped in wooden molds and dried in the relentless sun. These simple blocks stack into walls more permanent than reed construction. Granaries rise to store harvests against lean seasons. The accumulated wealth of successful farming creates something new in human experience: surplus, stored value, the foundation upon which cities will eventually stand. The people of the Ubaid period cannot know what they are beginning. They solve immediate problems. They feed their children. They honor their gods with fish and grain. They dig channels because crops need water. Yet each practical decision carries humanity further from its hunting past and closer to something unprecedented. In the marshes where rivers meet, civilization stirs in its first sleep. The marshland settlements grow restless with ambition. What begins as scattered villages along irrigation channels transforms across centuries into something the world has never witnessed. Population concentrates, buildings multiply, sacred spaces expand beyond anything practical necessity demands. By 4,500 years before the Common Era, the southern Mesopotamian plain hosts communities that strain against the very definition of village life. Uruk emerges from this ferment like a slow tide rising. The site occupies strategic ground where the Euphrates branches into multiple channels, commanding water access that smaller settlements cannot match. Early inhabitants cluster around two distinct sacred precincts, twin poles of spiritual power that will eventually merge into a single urban organism. The Eanna district honors Inanna, goddess of love and war, while the Anu ziggurat complex serves the sky god himself. Between these divine anchors, human habitation spreads like rings around twin stones dropped in still water. The temple economy takes root in these centuries. Priests become administrators, sacred precincts accumulate grain, livestock, and labor obligations. What begins as offerings to the gods transforms into systematic wealth management. Temple granaries swell with harvests collected from surrounding farmland. Herds of sheep and goats multiply under priestly oversight. The divine household requires feeding, clothing, and housing, and meeting these needs generates organizational complexity unknown to simpler societies. Mud brick architecture reaches new sophistication. Builders discover that sun-dried bricks laid in alternating patterns create stronger walls. Foundations sink deeper into the alluvial soil. Structures rise higher, their flat roofs creating additional living and working space. The Eanna precinct expands through successive building phases, each generation constructing atop the leveled remains of previous sacred structures. This layering creates artificial hills that elevate temples above the surrounding plain, bringing worshippers closer to heaven. Craft specialization accelerates within Uruk's growing boundaries. Potters abandon the slow coil building techniques of earlier generations. The fast wheel appears, spinning clay into standardized vessels at unprecedented speed. Beveled rim bowls emerge from workshops by the thousands, their rough uniformity suggesting mass production for institutional distribution. These humble containers likely held grain rations for temple workers, material evidence of organized labor systems operating at urban scale. Metallurgy advances alongside ceramic innovation. Copper smelting techniques improve, producing tools and ornaments in greater quantities. Trade networks extend outward from Uruk, reaching distant sources of raw materials unavailable in the alluvial plain. Obsidian from Anatolian highlands, lapis lazuli from Afghan mountains, timber from Lebanese forests, all flow toward the growing city. Uruk becomes a node in exchange systems spanning thousands of kilometers. The population swells beyond 10,000 souls by 3,800 years before the Common Era. No previous human settlement has concentrated so many people in such limited space. Streets emerge between densely packed houses. Neighborhoods develop distinct characters. The challenges of urban existence, waste disposal, water distribution, conflict resolution, demand solutions that village customs cannot provide. New forms of social organization crystallize under pressure. The Eanna precinct transforms into a monumental complex. Limestone columns, rare and precious in this stoneless land, support temple porticos. Colored clay cones pressed into wet plaster create geometric mosaics covering entire walls. The visual impact announces power and permanence to all who approach. These buildings speak a language of authority that transcends spoken words, communicating divine favor and institutional might through sheer architectural presence. Uruk's influence radiates outward across Mesopotamia and beyond. Smaller settlements adopt Uruk styles, technologies, and organizational patterns. Trading colonies appear along routes stretching into Syria and Iran, carrying urban culture into regions still organized around village life. The Uruk expansion represents civilization's first great outward push, a template for cultural diffusion that later empires will repeat across millennia. The expansion carries within it a problem that will reshape human consciousness. Uruk's temple administrators face an impossible task. Thousands of workers require rations. Hundreds of fields demand accounting. Livestock herds multiply beyond any single memory's capacity. The complexity of urban life exceeds what human minds can reliably track, and the consequences of error grow catastrophic as populations swell. Clay becomes the solution. Small tokens shaped into cones, spheres, and cylinders have circulated through Mesopotamian villages for millennia, representing commodities in simple exchanges. Temple officials now adapt this ancient practice to unprecedented scale. Each token shape corresponds to a specific quantity of a specific good. A cone means a small measure of grain. A sphere represents a larger unit. Cylinders count animals. The system works, but barely. The breakthrough arrives through bureaucratic frustration. Administrators begin pressing tokens into soft clay envelopes before sealing them, creating visible records of contents without breaking the seal. Then someone realizes the impression alone carries sufficient information. The physical token becomes redundant. What matters is the mark in clay. This conceptual leap transforms everything. Scribes discover they can represent any quantity by varying the number and arrangement of impressions. A single tablet surface holds information that would require dozens of tokens. Storage becomes simpler, verification becomes faster. The administrative capacity of temple institutions multiplies overnight. The marks evolve rapidly. Pictographic signs emerge alongside numerical notations, stylized images representing the objects being counted. A head with lines radiating outward means barley. A simplified vessel indicates beer. An ox head counts cattle. These pictures require no spoken language to interpret. Any literate administrator from any linguistic background can read the essential information. Uruk scribes work in dedicated spaces within temple complexes. They prepare clay from riverbank deposits, kneading it to proper consistency, forming tablets sized to fit comfortably in one hand. A reed stylus, cut at precise angles, becomes the writing instrument. The scribe presses, rotates, and lifts in practiced sequences, building meaning through accumulated marks. The earliest tablets record staggeringly mundane information. Grain disbursements to workers. Livestock counts from temple herds. Beer rations for construction crews. Land allocations to dependent farmers. These administrative records lack any literary ambition, yet they accomplish something revolutionary. They extend institutional memory beyond individual human lifespans. Temple economies grow more sophisticated as recording capabilities expand. Administrators track multi-year agricultural cycles, comparing harvests across seasons. They monitor worker productivity, identifying efficient and inefficient practices. They calculate future needs based on recorded patterns. Writing enables planning horizons that oral cultures cannot sustain. The pictographic system reaches its limits within centuries. Some concepts resist visual representation. Abstract ideas, proper names, grammatical relationships all prove difficult to capture through pictures alone. Scribes begin using signs for their sound values rather than their pictorial meanings. A cognitive revolution that transforms writing from record-keeping into true language capture. This phonetic principle unlocks unlimited expressive potential. Any word in any language can theoretically be written by combining signs representing its component sounds. The system becomes flexible enough to record not just quantities but narratives, not just inventories but ideas. Writing evolves from administrative tool into cultural technology. The physical form of signs changes as scribes seek efficiency. Curved lines require multiple stylus strokes and slow production. Angular impressions prove faster. The wedge-shaped marks that give cuneiform its name emerge from this practical pressure. Beauty yields to speed, and speed enables scale. Training systems formalize as writing becomes essential to institutional function. Young scribes copy sign lists repeatedly, building muscle memory for hundreds of distinct marks. They memorize standard phrases, administrative formulas, and calculation methods. Years of apprenticeship produce specialists whose skills command respect and compensation. The technology spreads beyond Uruk through the same networks that carry urban culture outward. Smaller cities adopt cuneiform for their own administrative needs. Regional variations emerge but remain mutually intelligible. A common written tradition begins unifying Mesopotamian civilization across political boundaries. Writing creates new forms of power. Those who control the scribes control institutional memory. Those who can read verify claims independently. Literacy becomes a marker of elite status, a skill that separates administrators from laborers, priests from worshippers. The clay tablet becomes an instrument of authority as potent as any weapon. The clay tablet becomes an instrument of authority as potent as any weapon. And nowhere does this power concentrate more intensely than within the walls now rising around Uruk. By 3,100 years before the Common Era, the city achieves a scale unprecedented in human experience. 40,000 souls inhabit a single urban center, their lives interwoven through networks of obligation, commerce, and shared devotion that no previous settlement could sustain. The walls themselves announce Uruk's supremacy. 9 kilometers of fortification encircle the urban core, constructed from millions of mud bricks fired in kilns that consume entire groves of precious timber. Later tradition attributes this engineering marvel to a king named Gilgamesh, a figure who straddles the boundary between history and legend. Whether one man or many generations built these defenses matters less than what they represent. A community capable of mobilizing labor on a scale that transforms landscapes. Within these walls, the city divides into distinct precincts serving different functions. The Iana district remains the Sacred Heart, its temple complexes now covering an area larger than many entire villages. The White Temple crowns an artificial mountain of packed earth, its lime-plastered walls gleaming against the brown plain. Priests ascend the steep stairways at dawn, carrying offerings to Inanna, goddess of love and war, whose favor ensures the city's prosperity. The Anu district rises nearby, dedicated to the sky god, whose worship predates Inanna's prominence. Here, older architectural traditions persist alongside newer innovations. The competition between temple complexes drives continuous construction, each priesthood seeking to honor their deity with grander structures than their rivals manage. Residential quarters spread between and beyond these sacred centers. Narrow streets wind through neighborhoods where extended families occupy compounds of interconnected rooms. Workshops cluster by trade, creating districts where the sounds and smells of specific crafts dominate. Potters work near clay deposits. Metal workers concentrate where ventilation carries away toxic fumes. Weavers occupy upper stories where light streams through small windows. The cylinder seal emerges as the signature technology of this era. Small stone cylinders carved with intricate scenes roll across wet clay, leaving impressions that identify owners and authenticate documents. Master carvers create miniature masterpieces depicting ritual processions, mythological encounters, and scenes of daily labor. These seals become personal signatures, their unique patterns impossible to forge, their possession marking individuals as participants in the administrative system. Trade networks extend Uruk's influence across vast distances. Lapis lazuli arrives from mountains beyond the eastern horizon. Copper comes from lands to the south and west. Cedar logs float down rivers from forested highlands. In exchange, Uruk exports textiles, manufactured goods, and the intangible prestige of association with the world's greatest city. The harbor district bustles with activity as boats arrive bearing goods from tributary settlements throughout the alluvial plain. Standardized containers facilitate accounting. Warehouse complexes store surplus grain that feeds craftsmen who produce nothing edible themselves. This specialization creates interdependence that binds the urban population into a single organism. Beyond the walls, irrigated fields stretch toward the horizon. Canal networks grow more elaborate each generation, requiring coordinated maintenance that only centralized authority can organize. The agricultural surplus that feeds Uruk depends on engineering projects that individual families could never accomplish alone. The city justifies its existence through services it provides to the surrounding countryside. Temple workshops produce goods of extraordinary quality. Sculptors carve votive statues with inlaid eyes that seem to gaze into eternity. Jewelers set precious stones in gold, with techniques that later civilizations struggle to replicate. These objects serve religious purposes, but their creation requires economic systems capable of supporting full-time specialists who spend years mastering single crafts. The legendary Gilgamesh, whether historical king or composite memory, embodies the ambitions of this era. Stories describe him as two-thirds divine, a builder of walls, a seeker of immortality. His adventures against monsters and his friendship with the wild man Enkidu will echo through millennia of literature. The epic bearing his name preserves Sumerian values, the importance of civilization over wilderness, the inevitability of death, the consolation of lasting fame through great deeds. Uruk at its height represents humanity's first successful experiment in urban complexity. The challenges of feeding, housing, governing, and inspiring tens of thousands of people find solutions here that subsequent civilizations will adapt and refine. The patterns established in these decades between the Tigris and Euphrates become templates for urban life across the ancient world. The patterns established in Uruk spread outward like ripples across still water, and with them travels something darker than administrative innovation. By 2,900 years before the Common Era, the Sumerian plain hosts not one great city, but many, each commanding its own irrigation networks, its own temple complexes, its own ambitions. Lagash, Nippur, Eridu, these names mark centers of power that refuse subordination. The age of cooperation gives way to an age of competition, and competition demands a new kind of leader. The The title Lugal emerges from this crucible of conflict. The word means simply big man, but its implications reshape Sumerian society, where temple administrators once coordinated collective labor for divine purposes. The Lugal commands warriors for earthly conquest. Palace complexes rise alongside temple precincts, secular authority carving space beside sacred power. The architecture of governance transforms as mud brick walls thicken into fortifications. Kish claims primacy in these turbulent centuries. Located where the Tigris and Euphrates flow closest together, this city controls crucial trade routes and agricultural lands. Its kings assert dominion over other city-states, and the title King of Kish becomes synonymous with hegemony over all Sumer. To hold this title means commanding the allegiance of lesser rulers, extracting tribute, settling disputes between rival cities. The Sumerian King List, compiled centuries later, records dynasty after dynasty claiming this prestigious designation. The causes of warfare multiply as populations grow. Water rights spark the deadliest conflicts. Each city depends on canals drawing from the same rivers, and upstream diversions can devastate downstream harvests. Boundary disputes over fertile fields escalate from legal arguments to armed confrontations. Trade route control promises wealth to victors and poverty to losers. Religious prestige demands territorial expansion, as kings seek to honor their patron deities with conquered lands and plundered treasures. Military technology evolves rapidly under competitive pressure. The phalanx formation appears on cylinder seals and carved reliefs. Ranks of soldiers advancing behind interlocked shields, copper-tipped spears bristling forward. Helmets of hammered bronze protect skulls from mace blows. War carts drawn by onagers carry commanders above the chaos of infantry combat. Siege techniques develop as cities fortify themselves behind increasingly massive walls. The human cost registers in mass graves and lamentations. Scribes record casualties, widows, orphaned children. Temple economies strain to support populations swollen by refugees fleeing conquered territories. Priests compose hymns pleading for divine intervention, for peace, for the restoration of order. Yet the cycle continues, each generation inheriting the grievances of the last. Royal tombs from this period reveal the ideology sustaining this violence. Kings descend into death, accompanied by retinues of servants, soldiers, musicians, all sacrificed to serve their master in the afterlife. The death pits at Ur, though dating slightly later, preserve practices rooted in early dynastic beliefs about royal power transcending mortality itself. Such displays demonstrate that kingship has become something more than administrative convenience. It has become sacred. The city of Nippur occupies a unique position amid this chaos. Home to Enlil, chief of the Sumerian pantheon, Nippur serves as a religious capital that no single city-state can claim exclusively. Kings journey here to receive divine sanction for their rule. The temple of Enlil becomes neutral ground where rivals negotiate, where treaties receive sacred witness, where the gods themselves supposedly arbitrate human disputes. This arrangement preserves Nippur from the worst devastation, while concentrating religious authority in a center separate from political power. By 2,700 years before the Common Era, the patterns of Sumerian statecraft have crystallized into forms that will persist for millennia. Kingship legitimized through military victory and divine approval, cities fortified against rivals while connected through trade and shared culture. Scribes recording royal achievements on monuments meant to last forever. Priests mediating between human ambition and cosmic order. The foundations of ancient Near Eastern civilization rest on this bloody bedrock, where humanity first learned that building cities meant defending them. The dead descend into the earth wearing gold. Beneath the streets of Ur, around 2,600 years before the Common Era, workers excavate shafts that plunge deep into the alluvial soil. These are not ordinary graves. The pits measure over 10 meters in length, their walls lined with reed matting, their floors prepared for ceremonies that will seal dozens of human lives within the darkness forever. The royal cemetery of Ur represents something unprecedented in human burial practice. Approximately 1,700 graves cluster in this sacred precinct, but 16 of them contain something that sets them apart from all others. These are the death pits, where kings and queens journey into the afterlife, accompanied by entire retinues of servants, musicians, soldiers, and attendants who follow their masters into oblivion. The wealth concentrated in these chambers defies comprehension. Gold helmets hammered into the shape of elaborate wigs, each strand of hair rendered in precious metal, headdresses constructed from gold leaves, lapis lazuli beads, and carnelian pendants that cascade down past the shoulders. Lyres with bull heads crafted from gold and lapis, their sound boxes decorated with shell inlay depicting mythological scenes, daggers with blades of gold and handles of lapis lazuli, gaming boards with pieces carved from precious stone. The accumulated treasure represents trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers, from the lapis mines of Afghanistan to the gold sources of Egypt or Anatolia. One tomb stands above all others in its preservation and splendor. The burial chamber of a woman identified by a cylinder seal as Puabi reveals the full magnificence of Sumerian royal death ritual. Her body rests upon a wooden bier, adorned with a headdress weighing over 2 kilograms, constructed from gold ribbons, wreaths of gold leaves, and strands of lapis and carnelian beads. Gold rings encircle every finger. A golden cup lies near her hand, perhaps containing the final drink that carried her into eternal sleep. Around Puabi lie the bodies of her attendants. 5 armed men guard the chamber entrance. 10 women wearing elaborate headdresses recline in orderly rows, their bodies positioned as if they simply lay down and never rose. Near each woman rests a small cup, the vessel that likely held the poison or sedative that ended their lives. A harpist clutches her instrument, frozen in the act of playing music for eternity. The death pit associated with this burial extends the horror and magnificence further. 63 additional bodies occupy the sloping ramp leading down to the chamber. Soldiers in copper helmets stand in formation. Grooms hold the reins of oxen still yoked to wooden sledges. Women in court dress arrange themselves in neat rows. The entire household descends together, a complete functioning court transported into the underworld. The logistics of such mass death remain debated. Some bodies show no signs of violence, suggesting willing participation or drug compliance. Others bear evidence of blunt trauma to the skull, perhaps a mercy killing administered after sedation. The orderly arrangement of bodies indicates careful choreography rather than chaotic slaughter. These people walked into the pit, took their positions, consumed their final drink, and waited for death while musicians played and incense burned. The theological reasoning behind such sacrifice reflects Sumerian beliefs about the afterlife. The dead require servants in the netherworld, just as the living require them on earth. A king without attendants would suffer diminished status among the shades. The retinue ensures that royal power continues unbroken across the boundary of death. Those who accompany their masters may have believed they secured privileged positions in the realm below. The craftsmanship displayed in these tombs reveals the sophistication of Sumerian metallurgy and lapidary work. Gold workers mastered techniques of granulation, filigree, and repoussé that would not be surpassed for millennia. The famous ram caught in a thicket, with its gold leaf face and lapis wool, demonstrates sculptural skill, combining multiple materials into unified artistic vision. These objects were not merely valuable, but sacred, created specifically for the journey into darkness. The royal tombs of Uruk illuminate a society where death served as the ultimate display of power, where the boundary between this world and the next required blood and gold to cross, where servants followed masters into the silent earth. The gold and lapis lazuli descend into royal darkness, but above ground, the living wage war over something far more precious than precious metals: water. Between the cities of Lagash and Umma stretches a fertile plain called the Guadena, and for generations this territory becomes the most contested ground in all Mesopotamia. The conflict that erupts here around 2,500 years before the Common Era will burn for over a century, producing some of history's first detailed war records and revealing the brutal logic that governs city-state competition. The Guadena's value lies not in its soil alone, but in the canals that cross it. Whoever controls these channels controls the agricultural surplus that feeds armies, fills temple granaries, and sustains urban populations. When Umma's farmers divert water upstream, Lagash's fields wither. When Lagash blocks access to irrigation networks, Umma's harvests fail. Neither city can prosper while the other threatens its water supply. The earliest phase of this conflict remains obscured by fragmentary records, but by the reign of Eannatum of Lagash, around 2,450 years before the Common Era, the warfare reaches unprecedented intensity. Eannatum claims divine sanction for his campaigns, declaring himself chosen by Ningirsu, the warrior god of Lagash. His armies march not merely for territory, but for cosmic justice. The Stele of Vultures commemorates Eannatum's decisive victory over Umma. This limestone monument, fragments of which survive, depicts scenes of extraordinary violence. Soldiers march in tight phalanx formation, their overlapping shields creating walls of bronze and leather. Vultures and lions feast upon the corpses of the defeated. The king himself rides a war chariot into battle, leading his troops against the enemy. The stele's inscription records the terms imposed upon Umma. Boundary stones mark the new frontier. Oaths sworn before the gods bind Umma's rulers to respect these limits. Grain payments flow from the defeated city to Lagash's temples. The document names the gods who witness these agreements, invoking divine punishment upon any who violate the sacred boundary. Yet the peace proves temporary. Umma's subsequent rulers repeatedly challenge the imposed borders. Each generation sees renewed conflict, fresh campaigns, new monuments celebrating victories that never produce lasting resolution. The fundamental problem remains unsolvable through military means alone. Both cities need the same water, the same land, the same agricultural surplus. The administrative records from this period reveal the economic machinery that sustains prolonged warfare. Temple estates organize labor for both agricultural production and military service. Scribes track grain distributions to soldiers, Craftsmen produce weapons in quantities suggesting standing armies rather than seasonal levies. War becomes institutionalized, woven into the fabric of city-state governance. Uruk of Lagash, ruling around 2350 years before the Common Era, attempts a different approach. His reform texts describe efforts to reduce corruption, protect widows and orphans, and limit the exploitation of common people by palace and temple officials. These documents represent humanity's first recorded social reforms, acknowledging that internal justice matters alongside external conquest. Yet, Urukagina's reign ends in catastrophe. Lugalzagjizi of Umma finally achieves what his predecessors could not, conquering Lagash and burning its temples. The lament composed after this destruction describes sacred precincts violated, divine statues carried away, priests slaughtered at their altars. Lagash's century of dominance collapses in a single devastating campaign. The border wars between these cities illuminate patterns that will repeat throughout Mesopotamian history. Water scarcity drives conflict. Military victory brings temporary advantage, but never permanent security. Divine sanction justifies violence, while sacred oaths prove insufficient to prevent its recurrence. The monuments that celebrate triumph become records of endless, exhausting struggle. Stone boundary markers still bear cuneiform inscriptions, invoking gods who witnessed treaties made and broken across generations of warfare. The exhausted city-states barely notice the shadow gathering in the north, while Lagash and Umma bleed each other over irrigation canals, while Uruk's ancient prestige fades into memory, while Kish changes hands between rival dynasties. A man rises from obscurity to reshape the entire world. His origins remain deliberately mysterious. Later legends claim he floated down the Euphrates in a basket of rushes, rescued and raised by a gardener, elevated to cupbearer in the court of Kish. The story echoes through millennia, borrowed by cultures that never knew his name. What matters is not the myth, but the reality that emerges around 2334, before the Common Era. Sargon of Akkad begins his conquest. The Akkadians speak a Semitic language distinct from Sumerian, though they have lived alongside the southern cities for generations. They worship similar gods, use cuneiform script, participate in Mesopotamian culture, while maintaining separate identity. Sargon transforms this cultural position into military advantage. He commands loyalty from Akkadian populations scattered throughout the city-states while understanding Sumerian institutions intimately enough to exploit their weaknesses. His army operates differently from traditional Sumerian forces, where city-state militias fight seasonal campaigns before returning to agricultural duties. Sargon maintains professional soldiers bound to him personally rather than to any city. These troops carry composite bows capable of devastating massed infantry formations. They move faster than temple-organized levies, strike before defenders can mobilize, withdraw before superior numbers can concentrate against them. Kish falls first, its king defeated and its ancient prestige transferred to the conqueror. Uruk follows, its legendary walls proving insufficient against disciplined assault. Submits. Lagash, weakened by generations of border warfare, offers little resistance. Umma, Nippur, Eridu, Larsa, the great cities of Sumer, surrender one after another to the northern warlord. The victory stele erected after these conquests depicts bound prisoners in endless procession. Vultures circle above fallen enemies. The king stands larger than all other figures, receiving divine blessing for his unprecedented achievement. This is not merely military triumph, but cosmic validation. The gods themselves have chosen Sargon to unite what was divided. He establishes his capital at Agade, a city whose location remains unknown to modern archaeology despite its legendary magnificence. Contemporary texts describe walls gleaming with precious metals, temples rivaling anything in the southern cities, harbors receiving ships from distant lands. Agade becomes the center of the world's first true empire, administering territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean coast. The administrative innovation proves as significant as the military conquest. Sargon installs his own governors in conquered cities, replacing local dynasties with loyal Akkadian officials. He standardizes weights and measures across his realm, facilitating trade and taxation. He maintains permanent garrisons in strategic locations, ensuring rapid response to rebellion. The temple economies continue functioning, but now their surplus flows toward Agade rather than remaining in local treasuries. His daughter Enheduanna receives appointment as high priestess of the moon god at Ur, the most prestigious religious position in Sumer. She composes hymns in Sumerian that will be copied for centuries, becoming the first author in human history whose name survives. Her installation represents deliberate policy, Akkadian political control legitimized through Sumerian religious tradition. The empire expands beyond Mesopotamia entirely. Campaigns reach the cedar forests of Lebanon, the silver mines of Anatolia, the trading posts of the Persian Gulf. Sargon boasts of ships from distant lands mooring at Agade's quays, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Oman, timber from Syria, all flow toward the imperial center through networks of trade and tribute. Rebellions erupt repeatedly throughout his reign. The Sumerian cities never fully accept foreign domination. Sargon suppresses each uprising with calculated brutality, destroying walls, deporting populations, installing new garrisons. The pattern establishes imperial precedent that will echo through Assyrian and Persian and Roman conquests millennia later. He reigns for approximately 56 years, dying around 2279 before the Common Era. His empire passes to his sons, who will expand it further before internal conflicts and external pressures begin its gradual dissolution. But the precedent survives the dynasty. Sargon proves that disparate cities can be unified under single authority, that professional armies can overcome traditional militias, that administrative systems can govern vast territories. Clay tablets preserve his memory as the model conqueror, the king against whom all subsequent rulers measure themselves. The empire does not pause to mourn its founder. Within months of Sargon's death, his son Raimush inherits a realm already fracturing along its seams. Cities that bent knee to the conqueror test the resolve of his successor, and Raimush responds with campaigns of systematic violence that palace inscriptions record with chilling precision. Tens of thousands killed, tens of thousands deported. The numbers may exaggerate, but the message remains clear. Akkadian authority tolerates no defiance. Raimush reigns only 9 years before dying, under circumstances ancient sources describe with suggestive vagueness. His brother Manish-Tushu succeeds him, continuing the pattern of military consolidation and administrative expansion. Trade networks extend further. Akkadian merchants establish permanent presence in distant lands. The empire's appetite for resources grows insatiable, but the dynasty reaches its zenith under Naram-Sin, grandson of Sargon, who ascends around 2254 before the Common Era, where his predecessors claimed the title of king. Naram Sin eventually declares himself divine. His name appears in cuneiform, with the star symbol reserved for gods. Temple priests offer sacrifices to his living image. No Mesopotamian ruler has ever claimed such status. The victory stele of Naram Sin captures this unprecedented confidence in pink limestone. The king towers over his enemies, climbing a mountain whose peak reaches towards celestial symbols. His soldiers follow in ordered ranks, while defeated lullaby tribesmen fall beneath his feet or beg for mercy. The composition breaks every convention of earlier Sumerian art. No registers divide the scene. No gods hover above to grant victory. Naram Sin himself occupies the divine position, wearing the horned helmet of deity. Provincial administration achieves new sophistication under his reign. Governors bearing the title of Ensi manage individual cities while remaining answerable to Akkadian authority. Standardized weights and measures facilitate taxation across the empire. A network of royal messengers carries communications between Agade and distant outposts. The bureaucratic machinery Sargon improvised becomes systematic institution. Yet the Sumerian cities endure beneath this foreign superstructure. Temples continue their ancient rituals. Scribes preserve their literary traditions. The Sumerian language persists in religious and scholarly contexts even as Akkadian becomes the language of administration and commerce. Cultural absorption flows in both directions. Akkadian rulers adopt Sumerian religious practices, patronize Sumerian temples, commission works in Sumerian artistic styles. The empire's final decades bring mounting pressure. Naram Sin campaigns against the Gutians, mountain peoples from the Zagros highlands who raid with increasing boldness. His inscriptions claim victories, but the raids continue. His son Shar-Kali Shari inherits an empire already contracting, spending his reign fighting defensive wars on multiple fronts. Around 2154 before the Common Era, the Akkadian dynasty collapses entirely. Later, Sumerian texts blame divine punishment for Naram Sin's hubris, claiming the gods sent the Gutians as instruments of vengeance. Modern analysis suggests more prosaic causes. Climate shifts reduce agricultural yields. Trade networks disrupted by warfare cannot supply essential resources. Provincial governors assert independence as central authority weakens. The Gutians establish loose hegemony over much of Mesopotamia, though their control never approaches Akkadian systematization. Individual Sumerian cities regain effective autonomy, paying tribute to Gutian overlords while managing their own affairs. The great experiment in unified empire ends, but its memory persists in clay archives and royal inscriptions. Scribes in subsequent centuries will copy and recopy the legends of Sargon and Naram Sin. The Akkadian century establishes templates for imperial ambition that outlive the empire itself. Centralized administration, professional military force, divine kingship, provincial governance through appointed officials. These innovations enter the permanent repertoire of Mesopotamian statecraft, waiting for the next power capable of implementing them across the land between the rivers. The mountains disgorge their people into the broken plains. From the Zagros highlands, Gutian warriors descend upon a Mesopotamia already hemorrhaging from internal rebellion and succession wars. The Akkadian administrative apparatus, so carefully constructed over generations, collapses not through a single catastrophic defeat, but through the slow accumulation of failures. Provincial governors stop sending tribute. military garrisons abandon their posts. The messenger system that once carried royal commands across vast distances falls silent. The Gutians present something unprecedented to Sumerian civilization. These are not rival city-states competing within shared cultural frameworks. They are outsiders, mountain dwellers, whom Mesopotamian scribes describe with undisguised contempt as people who know nothing of kingship, who have no understanding of proper governance. Yet these supposedly primitive warriors prove capable enough to dominate the lowlands for nearly a century. Their rule settles over Mesopotamia like an uncomfortable weight. Gutian kings establish themselves at various centers, extracting tribute from cities that once commanded empires. The great palace complexes at Akkad fall into disrepair. Administrative archives cease their meticulous recording. Trade networks contract as merchant caravans face uncertain protection on roads once secured by Akkadian military might. Yet, beneath this apparent darkness, something remarkable occurs. The Sumerian cities survive. Lagash, Uruk, Nippur, these ancient centers continue functioning under Gutian overlordship. Local rulers called Ensi govern their populations, maintaining irrigation systems, conducting temple rituals, preserving scribal traditions. The Gutians lack either the interest or the capacity to impose the kind of systematic provincial administration that characterized Akkadian rule. Lagash emerges as the most vibrant center during these decades. Under a succession of capable rulers, the city experiences what later generations will recognize as a cultural renaissance. Gudea, who governs Lagash around 2140 before the Common Era, commissions temple construction projects of extraordinary ambition. Statues carved from imported diorite depict him in poses of pious devotion, hands clasped in eternal prayer. The inscriptions on these statues reveal a ruler deeply invested in traditional Sumerian religious practice. Gudea describes elaborate dreams in which gods command him to build temples. He imports cedar from Lebanon, gold from distant lands, stone from mountains beyond the horizon. Trade networks, though diminished from Akkadian heights, still function sufficiently to supply luxury materials for sacred construction. Scribal schools continue training new generations in cuneiform writing. Literary compositions flourish, including hymns praising Gudea's building projects in sophisticated Sumerian poetry. The apparent political fragmentation masks cultural continuity. Sumerian civilization proves more resilient than the empires that briefly unified it. The Gutian period also witnesses important developments in religious thought. Temple institutions, freed from imperial extraction, accumulate resources and influence. Priests and priestesses maintain ritual calendars, conduct festivals, interpret divine will through omens and dreams. The gods of Sumer remain present in their earthly houses, receiving offerings from populations seeking protection in uncertain times. Around 2112 before the Common Era, the Gutian dominance ends with surprising swiftness. Utu-Hagal of Uruk leads a coalition that defeats the final Gutian king, Tirigan. Sumerian sources celebrate this victory as liberation from foreign oppression, the restoration of proper order after generations of darkness. The land between the rivers prepares for its final Sumerian flowering, a brief golden age that will produce the most sophisticated bureaucratic state the ancient world has yet witnessed. The liberation transforms into dynasty within months. Utu-Hagal's triumph over the Gutians proves brief. He drowns under mysterious circumstances, and power passes to his former general, a man named Ur-Nammu. This soldier from Ur seizes the moment with calculated precision, declaring himself king around 2112 before the Common Era and establishing what historians will call the Third Dynasty of Ur. The new king inherits a landscape of exhausted city-states, depleted treasuries, and crumbling infrastructure. Decades of Gutian extraction and constant warfare have left canals silted, temples neglected, and populations scattered. Ur-Nammu responds with a building program unprecedented in Sumerian history, understanding that monumental architecture communicates divine favor more effectively than any military victory. The great ziggurat of Ur rises from the flat alluvial plain like a manufactured mountain. Workers haul millions of mud bricks to create a stepped pyramid reaching toward heaven. Its core of sun-dried brick, encased in an outer shell of fired brick set in bitumen mortar. 3 massive staircases converge at the first terrace, their precise geometry visible from miles across the surrounding farmland. The structure measures approximately 64 meters in length, 45 meters in width, and originally towered perhaps 30 meters above the plain. This ziggurat serves as the earthly dwelling of Nana, the moon god and patron deity of Ur. Priests ascend the staircases to perform rituals in the temple crowning the summit, mediating between divine and human realms. The building's orientation aligns with cardinal directions, its corners pointing toward the 4 winds. Blue-glazed bricks may have decorated upper terraces, creating the impression of a stairway ascending into the sky itself. Ur-Nammu's construction extends beyond this single monument. He rebuilds temples throughout his expanding realm, restores canal systems neglected during the Gutian period, and constructs defensive walls around major cities. Each project employs thousands of laborers, redistributing wealth through wages paid in barley, oil, and wool. The building program simultaneously honors the gods, provides employment, and demonstrates royal power. The king's most enduring innovation involves written law. The Code of Ur-Nammu predates Hammurabi's famous laws by approximately 3 centuries, establishing the oldest surviving legal code in human history. Fragmentary tablets preserve provisions addressing murder, robbery, assault, and divorce. Unlike later codes emphasizing physical punishment, Ur-Nammu's laws frequently prescribe monetary compensation, a specified weight of silver for a broken bone, a different amount for a severed nose. The code's prologue presents Ur-Nammu as a shepherd chosen by the gods to establish justice throughout the land. He claims to have eliminated corruption, standardized weights and measures, and protected the weak from the powerful. Whether these claims reflect reality or royal propaganda, the very existence of written law represents a fundamental shift in governance. Rules become fixed, knowable, applicable beyond the memory of any individual judge. Administrative records multiply exponentially during this period. Scribes document every transaction in the temple and palace economies: grain harvests, livestock counts, labor assignments, tribute payments. Tens of thousands of tablets survive from the Ur III period, revealing a bureaucratic apparatus of remarkable sophistication. Messengers carry sealed documents between provincial centers and the capital, maintaining communication across an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the upper Euphrates. Ur-Nammu dies around 2094 before the Common Era, possibly in battle against the Gutians, who continue raiding from the mountains. His death hymn, composed by court poets, describes his descent to the underworld and the offerings he presents to its deities. The text reveals Sumerian beliefs about the afterlife, a gloomy realm where the dead exist as shadows, sustained by offerings from the living. His son, Shulgi, inherits a functioning state and will reign for nearly half a century, transforming his father's foundations into the most centralized administration the ancient world has yet witnessed. The ziggurat stands complete, its staircases worn smooth by priestly feet, ascending toward the moon god's dwelling. The son surpasses the father through administration rather than conquest. Shulgi ascends the throne around 2047 before the Common Era, and immediately recognizes that military power alone cannot sustain empire. Over the next 48 years, he constructs the most sophisticated bureaucratic apparatus the ancient world has ever witnessed, transforming Sumer into a kingdom governed by clay tablets rather than bronze swords. The administrative revolution begins with standardization. Shulgi imposes uniform weights and measures across all territories, eliminating the chaos of competing local systems. A mina of silver in Ur now equals a mina in distant Susa. Grain measures align from the Persian Gulf to the northern mountains. Merchants and tax collectors operate within predictable frameworks, their transactions recorded on tablets that flow towards central archives in staggering quantities. The messenger system emerges as the empire's nervous system. Way stations dot the roads at intervals of roughly 15 miles, each staffed with fresh runners, donkeys, and supplies. Royal correspondence moves across the realm with unprecedented speed. A tablet dispatched from Ur reaches Nippur within a day, Susa within a week. Provincial governors cannot hide failures or delays when inspectors arrive bearing royal seals and demanding immediate accounts. Shulgi reorganizes the temple economy into a vast state enterprise. The great households of Enlil at Nippur, Naina at Ur, and Inanna at Uruk become administrative centers managing thousands of workers. Weavers, farmers, shepherds, and craftsmen labor within institutional frameworks, their rations calculated to the last measure of barley. Overseers record everything: wool production, grain yields, livestock births, worker absences. The archives swell with tens of thousands of tablets documenting the kingdom's economic pulse. The Bala system rotates provincial obligations throughout the year. Each region bears responsibility for supplying the central government during assigned months, providing grain, livestock, and labor according to fixed quotas. The rotation prevents any single province from bearing crushing burdens while ensuring continuous resource flow to Ur. Accountants track contributions with obsessive precision, noting shortfalls that trigger investigations and penalties. Shulgi deifies himself during his reign, a radical departure from earlier Sumerian kingship. Temples receive offerings in his name. Hymns celebrate his divine nature, describing athletic prowess, musical talent, and scholarly achievement. The king claims to have run from Nippur to Ur and back in a single day, a distance exceeding 200 miles. Whether literal truth or royal propaganda, such claims establish Shulgi as more than mortal, a living god whose commands carry cosmic authority. The scribal schools flourish under royal patronage. Shulgi promotes himself as a scholar king who mastered cuneiform in his youth and composed hymns in both Sumerian and Akkadian. The tablet houses produce standardized curricula, training generations of administrators in the complex skills required to manage the bureaucratic state. Students copy the same texts from Ur to Eshnunna, creating cultural unity through shared literary education. Provincial governors answer to royal inspectors who arrive unannounced, examining records and interviewing subordinates. Corruption exists but faces systematic detection. The archives preserve letters from anxious officials explaining discrepancies, pleading for understanding, promising reforms. The bureaucratic machine grinds forward, indifferent to individual excuses, demanding accountability through documented evidence. The kingdom reaches its territorial peak under Shulgi's successors, Amar Sin and Shu Sin. The administrative system functions smoothly, processing information and resources across vast distances. Yet the very perfection of the machine contains seeds of fragility. When external pressures mount and internal systems strain, the elaborate apparatus will prove unable to adapt. For now, clay tablets accumulate in archive rooms, recording a civilization's attempt to govern through perfect knowledge and absolute control. The archives fall silent on matters the scribes consider self-evident. Behind every tablet recording barley rations, behind every administrative seal and royal inscription, stands an invisible architecture of divine power that requires no documentation because it permeates every breath of Sumerian existence. The gods do not merely watch over this civilization, they own it entirely. Enlil commands from Nippur, his temple the Ikur rising from the plain as the cosmic mountain made manifest in mud brick. No king legitimately rules without his blessing. No city prospers without his favor. The scribes call him Father of the Gods, Lord of the Command, the one whose word cannot be altered. His breath is the wind itself, his anger the devastating storm that flattens reed houses and scatters livestock across flooded plains. Pilgrims travel from every city-state to seek his blessing, their offerings accumulating in temple storerooms that rival royal treasuries. Enki dwells in the watery depths beneath Eridu, the oldest of sacred cities. His domain is the sweet underground waters that rise through wells and springs, the fresh current that makes irrigation possible. Yet his power extends beyond mere hydrology into the realm of wisdom, craft, and cunning intelligence. The scribes credit him with organizing civilization itself, assigning each god their proper function, each craft its divine patron. His temple, the Abzu, sits where fresh water meets salt marsh, the primordial boundary between order and chaos. Inanna burns brightest among the divine assembly. Her temple in Uruk, the Iana, houses a goddess of terrifying complexity. Simultaneously queen of heaven, morning and evening star, patron of love and warfare, sexuality and political power. Kings claim her as divine spouse, legitimizing their rule through sacred marriage rituals performed in temple precincts. Her myths describe descents into the underworld and triumphant returns, cosmic journeys that mirror the planet Venus disappearing below the horizon and re-emerging transformed. The temple economy functions as divine household management. Priests and priestesses serve as domestic staff for deities who require feeding, clothing, bathing, and entertainment. Cult statues receive daily meals placed before them on offering tables. The food later distributed to temple personnel after the gods consume its spiritual essence. Musicians perform before divine images. Servants sweep sacred floors. The entire apparatus operates on the assumption that gods possess needs identical to human rulers, merely amplified to cosmic scale. Votive statues crowd temple chambers, stone figures with enormous eyes fixed eternally on divine presence. Wealthy worshippers commission these permanent proxies to pray continuously on their behalf, hands clasped, gazes unwavering, maintaining devotional attention impossible for living humans occupied with daily concerns. the statues accumulate over generations, silent congregations frozen in perpetual supplication. The divine hierarchy mirrors earthly political structures with uncomfortable precision. An assembly of gods debates cosmic decisions, major deities holding greater influence while minor spirits attend as subordinates. Patron gods protect individual cities, their fortunes rising and falling with their earthly domains. When Akkadian conquerors impose foreign rule, they do not abolish Sumerian gods, but incorporate them into expanded pantheons, recognizing that divine power transcends political boundaries. This theological architecture will outlast the civilization that constructed it. Babylonians and Assyrians inherit Sumerian gods under different names, preserving hymns and rituals across millennia. The flood story survives into biblical tradition. The divine assembly becomes heavenly council. The cosmic mountain transforms into sacred high places across the ancient world. Sumerian priests standing before cult statues in lamplight temple chambers cannot imagine how far their theological innovations will travel, how deeply their understanding of divine order will shape human religious imagination for thousands of years beyond their own forgotten graves. The mud bricks rise from the earth in endless procession. Across the alluvial plain, workers shape the sacred geometry that will connect heaven and earth, pressing river clay into wooden molds under the relentless Mesopotamian sun. Each brick dries for days before joining millions of its companions in structures that will define Sumerian civilization's most enduring architectural achievement. The ziggurat emerges from theological necessity rather than aesthetic ambition. Sumerian cosmology positions the gods on a cosmic mountain where heaven meets earth, a primordial height rising from the waters of creation. The flat floodplain offers no natural elevation, so human hands must construct what nature withholds. These artificial mountains become the physical manifestation of divine geography, platforms where gods might descend to receive worship and offerings from their earthly servants. Construction begins with foundations sunk deep into the unstable alluvium. Engineers understand that the soft Mesopotamian soil cannot support massive weight without careful preparation. Reed mats layer beneath the lowest courses, distributing pressure across broader areas. Bitumen waterproofing protects against the rising groundwater that threatens every structure in this land between rivers. The builders work with materials their environment provides, transforming limitation into innovation. The core rises in stages, each level smaller than the one below, creating the characteristic stepped profile visible across the plain. Workers carry baskets of mud bricks up ramps that spiral around the growing structure, an endless human chain moving materials skyward. Supervisors mark progress on clay tablets, recording brick counts and labor allocations with the same precision applied to temple grain stores. Baked bricks face the exterior surfaces, protecting the sun-dried core from the erosive rains that arrive each winter. These fired bricks represent enormous investment. Fuel remains scarce in a land without forests, and kilns consume precious resources. The outer casing gleams in the sunlight, sometimes glazed in colors that transform the ziggurat into a beacon visible for miles across the flat landscape. Drainage channels pierce the massive structure at calculated intervals. Without these weep holes, moisture trapped within the core would expand and contract with seasonal temperature changes, eventually shattering the ziggurat from within. The builders understand that their creation must breathe, must release the pressures that accumulate in any massive construction. The summit temple crowns each ziggurat, a small sanctuary where the city's patron deity receives the most sacred offerings. Only priests ascend the ceremonial stairways to these elevated chambers, performing rituals invisible to the crowds gathered at ground level. The temple furnishings include beds and tables, provisions for divine visitors who might descend from the heavens to rest within their earthly dwelling. Ur-Nammu's great ziggurat at Ur represents the pinnacle of this architectural tradition. 3 massive staircases converge at the first terrace, their steep angles emphasizing the vertical journey from earthly realm to divine presence. The structure rises in 3 stages, each faced with baked brick, the whole complex dedicated to Nana, the moon god who watches over the city. The symbolic program extends beyond mere construction technique. Ziggurats orient to cardinal directions, their corners pointing toward the 4 winds. The ascending levels represent cosmic zones, earth, atmosphere, and heaven, through which worshippers symbolically travel as they climb. The entire structure functions as axis mundi, the cosmic center where all realms intersect. Maintenance demands constant attention. Each generation must repair erosion damage, replace weathered-facing bricks, and reinforce sagging foundations. The ziggurats are never truly finished, existing in perpetual states of renewal that mirror the cosmic cycles they represent. Temple records document repair campaigns spanning centuries, evidence of ongoing commitment to these sacred mountains. The architectural knowledge encoded in these structures will travel far beyond Sumer's borders. Babylonians and Assyrians inherit ziggurat building traditions, constructing their own artificial mountains and cities across Mesopotamia. The Tower of Babel's story preserves distant memory of these ambitious constructions, transformed through centuries of retelling into cautionary tale about human pride reaching toward heaven. The knowledge passes from hand to hand in darkened rooms where dust motes drift through narrow windows. Within the Idaba, the tablet house, young minds encounter the accumulated wisdom of centuries, learning to transform wet clay into permanent memory. These institutions represent civilization's first systematic attempt to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. The tablet houses cluster near temple complexes in every major city, their modest mud brick facades concealing intellectual treasures. Nippur's scribal quarter alone contains dozens of these schools, each producing graduates who will staff temples, palaces, and merchant houses throughout the land. The Iduba transforms illiterate children into masters of cuneiform, keepers of the written word. Education begins around age 5 or 6, when students first enter the tablet house courtyard. The Umiya, the expert teacher, presides over instruction that will consume the next decade of each student's life. Discipline proves harsh by any standard. Surviving school texts describe beatings for tardiness, poor handwriting, and speaking without permission. The phrase, "he who would excel must suffer," echoes through Sumerian pedagogical tradition. Students begin with the most basic exercises. Fresh clay tablets receive simple wedge impressions, repeated endlessly until muscle memory develops. The stylus must be held at precise angles, pressed with exact pressure, rotated with consistent technique. Thousands of practice tablets survive, their surfaces covered with wobbly signs that gradually improve across successive attempts. The curriculum follows rigid progression. After mastering basic sign formation, students memorize lexical lists organizing the world into categories. Lists of trees, lists of stones, lists of professions, lists of divine names. These compilations serve dual purposes: teaching both writing technique and the conceptual frameworks through which Sumerians understand reality. A student who memorizes the profession list learns not merely words, but the entire social hierarchy. Mathematical instruction parallels linguistic training. Students master the sexagesimal system, learning multiplication tables, division procedures, and geometric calculations. Problem texts present practical scenarios involving canal construction, field measurement, and grain distribution. The mathematics serves administrative needs, preparing future scribes for careers managing temple estates and royal projects. Advanced students progress to literary texts. The great compositions of Sumerian tradition pass from generation to generation through careful copying. Students reproduce hymns to Inanna, laments for destroyed cities, proverbs encoding practical wisdom. The Gilgamesh narratives circulate in multiple versions, each tablet house preserving its own textual traditions. Through copying, students internalize not merely words, but the rhythms and structures of literary expression. The tablet house produces specialists for every sector of Sumerian society. Temple scribes manage divine estates, recording offerings, tracking livestock, and documenting ritual calendars. Palace scribes draft royal correspondence, compile tribute lists, and maintain military records. Merchant scribes facilitate long-distance trade, drafting contracts and recording transactions across vast commercial networks. Libraries accumulate within temple precincts, their collections growing across centuries. Clay tablets stack in baskets and line shelves in dedicated storage rooms. Catalog tablets record holdings, organizing knowledge by subject and purpose. These collections preserve legal precedents, medical treatments, astronomical observations, and literary masterpieces. When cities fall to conquest, victors sometimes preserve libraries, recognizing their irreplaceable value. The scribal profession carries tremendous prestige. A proverb declares that the scribe's hand is his fortune, distinguishing him from laborers whose bodies wear down through physical toil. Scribes sign their work, claiming authorship in ways denied to anonymous craftsmen. Some achieve fame that echoes across millennia, their names preserved on tablets still readable 4,000 years later. Female scribes exist, though rarely. Certain priestess classes require literacy for ritual duties. Royal women occasionally receive scribal education. The Nadatu priestesses of Sipar maintain their own archives, documenting property transactions and legal agreements. These exceptions prove the rule, however. The tablet house remains predominantly male space throughout Sumerian history. The knowledge preserved in these institutions will outlast the civilization that created them. Babylonian and Assyrian scribes continue copying Sumerian texts centuries after the language ceases to be spoken. The literary and scientific traditions born in Sumerian tablet houses flow into subsequent Mesopotamian cultures, eventually reaching Greek scholars who transform them further. Every library that exists today descends in some sense from these mud brick rooms where children first learn to write. The stories emerge from the same clay that holds the administrative records, yet these tablets carry something different, narratives that probe the boundaries between mortal and divine, between life and death, between meaning and oblivion. The literary tradition, preserved in Sumerian tablet houses, represents humanity's first sustained attempt to wrestle with existence through written narrative. Gilgamesh dominates this tradition. The king of Uruk, whether historical figure or pure legend, becomes the central character in Mesopotamian literature for 2,000 years. The earliest Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh date to the Ur-3 period, though the stories themselves likely circulated orally for centuries before scribes committed them to clay. These are not unified epics, but separate tales, each exploring different aspects of the hero's journey. In one poem, Gilgamesh travels to the cedar forest with his companion Enkidu to slay the monster Humbaba. The narrative pulses with adventure and friendship, with the terror of facing supernatural guardians. In another, Gilgamesh descends to the underworld to retrieve a sacred drum and drumstick that have fallen through a hole in the earth. Enkidu volunteers to make the journey, but fails to follow the ritual prohibitions that would allow his return. He becomes trapped among the dead, able only to describe to Gilgamesh the bleak conditions of the afterlife. The death of Enkidu haunts multiple compositions. Gilgamesh's grief drives him to seek immortality, to refuse the fate that claims all mortals. He journeys to the edges of the world, crosses the waters of death, meets the flood survivor Utnapishtim, who alone among humans achieved eternal life. The quest fails. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk with only the knowledge that fame through lasting works offers the sole immortality available to humankind. Inanna's descent to the underworld presents different mysteries. The goddess of love and war decides to visit her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. She passes through 7 gates, surrendering one divine garment or ornament at each threshold, until she stands naked before the throne of death. Ereshkigal kills her. The corpse hangs on a hook for 3 days. The rescue requires cunning. Enki creates beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails, creatures small enough to slip into the underworld unnoticed. They revive Inanna, but the laws of the dead demand a substitute. Demons follow her back to the living world, seeking someone to take her place. She refuses to surrender those who mourned her absence. Only her husband Dumuzi, who sat on her throne enjoying her absence, becomes the sacrifice. The story explains seasonal cycles. Dumuzi spends half the year among the dead, and the earth mourns with his sister, who takes his place for the remaining months. Creation myths establish cosmic order. The poem Enki and the World Order describes how the god of wisdom assigns functions to every element of civilization: rivers, fields, tools, crafts, cities. Nothing exists by accident. Divine intention shapes reality. The Eridu Genesis tells of the flood that nearly destroyed humanity, preserved by Ziusudra, who builds a boat at divine instruction. This narrative predates the biblical account by over a millennium. Cylinder seals carry these stories in miniature. Carved scenes depict Gilgamesh wrestling lions, Inanna receiving worship, cosmic battles between gods and monsters. These tiny images, rolled across clay to create continuous friezes, spread narrative art throughout Mesopotamian society. Even those who cannot read encounter the stories through visual representation. The literary tablets reveal sophisticated poetic techniques. Sumerian poetry employs repetition, parallelism, and formulaic phrases that aid both memorization and aesthetic effect. Epithets attached to divine names: Inanna of the myriad offices, Enlil, whose word is unchangeable. Dialogue advances narrative while revealing character. The scribes who copy these texts are not mere transcribers, but participants in a living tradition, sometimes adding lines, sometimes preserving variant versions. These stories answer questions that administration cannot address. Why do humans die while gods live forever? What obligations bind the living to the dead? How should mortals face the certainty of their own ending? The answers offered are not comforting. The underworld is dust and darkness. Immortality belongs only to the gods. Yet the stories themselves persist, copied and recopied, translated eventually into Akkadian and spread throughout the ancient world. The tales that Sumerian scribes first pressed into clay still speak across 4,000 years of silence. The clay tablets that preserve epic poetry share shelf space with documents of a different character entirely. Commercial contracts, shipping manifests, letters of credit, these mundane records reveal a world of exchange that stretches far beyond the alluvial plain. The merchants of Sumer operate networks spanning thousands of kilometers, connecting the riverine heartland to distant sources of materials the land itself cannot provide. The problem is fundamental. Southern Mesopotamia possesses abundant grain, wool, and fish. It lacks nearly everything else. No stone suitable for building or carving, no timber for construction or shipbuilding, no metals of any kind, no precious stones for temple decoration. The civilization that emerges here must trade or remain forever limited to what mud and reeds can provide. The solution transforms Sumerian society. Professional merchants, the Tomkaram, emerge as a distinct class operating under temple and palace sponsorship. They organize expeditions that follow established routes radiating outward from the great cities, northward along the rivers toward timber sources in the mountains, eastward across the Iranian plateau toward copper and tin deposits, southward down the Persian Gulf toward the mysterious lands of Dilmun, Magan, and Meluha. The harbor facilities at Ur reveal the scale of maritime commerce. Quays extend along canal banks, where boats of various sizes load and unload cargo. Reed vessels carry local goods between cities. Larger wooden craft, their hulls sealed with bitumen, venture into the open waters of the Gulf. The round trip to Dilmun, identified with modern Bahrain, takes approximately 1 month under favorable conditions. The goods flowing into Sumerian cities read like an inventory of the ancient world's treasures. Lapis lazuli arrives from the mountains of distant Afghanistan, transported overland through multiple intermediaries before reaching temple workshops. Carnelian comes from the Indus Valley, along with ivory, exotic woods, and distinctive etched beads. Copper arrives from Magan, identified with Oman, where ancient mines still bear traces of Bronze Age extraction. The system requires standardization. Weights and measures develop with remarkable precision. The mina, divided into 60 shekels, provides the basic unit for precious metals. The gur measures grain capacity. The sar calculates area. These standards, enforced by temple and palace authorities, make commerce possible across linguistic and cultural boundaries. A merchant from Ur can conduct business in distant markets using universally recognized measures. Commercial law evolves to address the complexities of long-distance trade. Contracts specify terms with extraordinary detail. Partnership agreements divide profits and losses according to predetermined formulas. Insurance arrangements protect against the hazards of travel. Letters of credit allow merchants to access funds in distant cities without carrying dangerous quantities of silver. The merchant quarters of major cities develop their own character. Warehouses cluster near harbor facilities. Money changers operate from established locations. Scribes specializing in commercial documentation maintain offices where contracts are drafted, witnessed, and archived. The density of economic activity creates neighborhoods distinct from the temple precincts and residential areas. The trade networks carry more than physical goods. Ideas, technologies, and artistic styles flow along commercial routes. Sumerian cylinder seals appear in distant markets. their distinctive imagery influencing local craftsmen. Foreign motifs enter Sumerian art through the same channels. The merchants serve as cultural intermediaries, connecting civilizations that would otherwise remain isolated. The silver that serves as currency accumulates in temple treasuries and private hands alike. Unlike later coinage, Sumerian silver circulates as weighed metal, its value determined by purity and mass rather than official stamp. The weighing of silver becomes a ritual of commerce, performed on balanced scales with standardized stone weights. Trust depends on accurate measurement and honest dealing. The commercial records preserve individual transactions while revealing systemic patterns. Seasonal rhythms govern trade as surely as they govern agriculture. Certain goods move only during specific periods when weather permits travel. Prices fluctuate according to supply and availability. The merchants who master these patterns prosper. Those who miscalculate face ruin. The workshops that produce Sumer's finest objects occupy quarters adjacent to temple precincts, their craftsmen laboring under divine patronage. These artisans transform raw materials into objects of transcendent beauty. Their skills pass through generations in closely guarded traditions. The goods they create serve gods and kings, marking status and mediating between mortal and divine realms. Metalworkers command particular respect among Sumerian craftsmen. Copper arrives from distant Magan, tin from the Iranian plateau, and gold from sources the merchants guard as trade secrets. Within the foundry, furnaces reach temperatures sufficient to liquefy bronze, the alloy that defines the age. Crucibles of fired clay contain the molten metal as smiths prepare casting molds of carved stone or lost wax forms. The process demands precise knowledge of metallurgical properties, timing, and technique. The bronze that emerges from these workshops takes countless forms. Weapons for royal armies, tools for agricultural labor, vessels for temple offerings, and decorative objects for elite consumption all flow for the same foundries. Each category requires specific alloy compositions. Weapons demand hardness achieved through higher tin content. Vessels require malleability for hammering and chasing. The mastersmith understands these distinctions intuitively, adjusting formulas according to intended purpose. Goldsmiths work in separate quarters where security concerns dictate restricted access. The precious metal arrives as dust, nuggets, or recycled objects, then undergoes purification through cupellation. Refined gold becomes sheet, wire, or granules, depending on the intended technique. Sumerian goldsmiths master filigree work of extraordinary delicacy, creating patterns from twisted wire soldered to backing sheets. Granulation produces surfaces covered in tiny gold spheres, each individually attached through techniques that modern metallurgists still study with admiration. The royal tombs of reveal goldsmithing at its apex. Headdresses of gold leaves and lapis lazuli beads adorned noble women in death. Golden vessels accompanied the deceased into eternity. The craftsmanship displayed in these burial goods represents accumulated generations of technical refinement, each master building upon predecessors' achievements. Lapidaries work the precious stones that arrive through merchant networks. Lapis lazuli from distant Badakhshan, carnelian from the Indus region, and agate from various sources all require specialized cutting and polishing techniques. The lapidary's workshop contains grinding stones of increasing fineness, drills tipped with harder materials, and polishing compounds that bring gemstones to brilliant luster. Cylinder seals carved from these materials represent the highest expression of miniature sculpture, their surfaces bearing scenes of mythology and daily life in exquisite detail. Textile production occupies the largest portion of the craft workforce. Temple weaving establishments employ hundreds of women who transform raw wool and flax into finished cloth. The vertical loom dominates these workshops, its weighted warp threads providing tension for the weft. Skilled weavers produce fabrics of varying quality, from coarse utilitarian cloth to fine textiles worthy of divine statues. Dyeing adds value to finished textiles through color transformation. Sumerian dyers extract pigments from plants, minerals, and insects, creating palettes ranging from deep blues to vibrant reds. The most precious dyes require rare materials and complex processing, making colored textiles markers of wealth and status. Temple inventories carefully distinguish cloth by color, recognizing the labor and materials invested in each hue. The craftsmen who produce these goods occupy an intermediate social position. Neither slaves nor fully independent, many work within institutional frameworks that provide materials and distribute finished products. Temple and palace workshops dominate production of luxury goods, though independent artisans serve private markets for everyday items. The distinction between sacred and secular production blurs when the same hands create objects for both divine and human use. Apprenticeship transmits craft knowledge across generations. Young workers learn by observation and practice, gradually mastering techniques that written instructions cannot adequately convey. The tacit knowledge embedded in skilled hands represents cultural capital beyond monetary valuation. When master craftsmen die without training successors, techniques disappear permanently from human capability. The knowledge that passes through apprentice hands finds its ultimate application in the homes that line the narrow streets of Sumerian cities. Beyond the temple precincts and palace complexes, beyond the workshops and tablet houses, ordinary families conduct lives shaped by rhythms older than writing itself. The residential quarters of Uruk reveal domestic architecture refined across millennia. Houses cluster along winding lanes barely wide enough for two people to pass. Exterior walls present blank faces of mud brick, windowless at street level for privacy and protection from summer heat. Entry passages turn sharply, preventing direct views into interior courtyards where family life unfolds beneath open sky. These courtyards serve as the heart of domestic existence. Light filters down onto packed earth floors where cooking fires burn, children play, and women grind grain on stone querns worn smooth by generations of use. Rooms open onto this central space, sleeping chambers, storage areas, sometimes a small shrine where household gods receive daily offerings of bread and beer. The houses of prosperous merchants and administrators expand this basic pattern across multiple stories. Upper floors provide sleeping quarters during hot months, when ground-level rooms become unbearable. Staircases of mud brick ascend from courtyard corners. Roof terraces offer evening gathering spaces where families escape the accumulated heat of sun-baked walls. Beneath many houses, family tombs hold ancestors in perpetual residence. The dead remain part of the household, receiving regular offerings through clay pipes that penetrate floor surfaces. This vertical arrangement, living above, dead below, reflects beliefs about the interconnection between generations. Families literally build their lives atop ancestral foundations. The material culture of these homes speaks to daily concerns far removed from epic poetry and divine worship. Ceramic vessels in standardized shapes serve specific functions. wide-mouthed jars for grain storage, narrow-necked bottles for precious oils, shallow bowls for serving food. Clay ovens built into courtyard corners produce the flatbreads that accompany every meal. Food preparation dominates female labor. Barley requires extensive processing before consumption: threshing, winnowing, grinding, soaking, cooking. Date palms provide fruit eaten fresh or dried, pressed into syrup, or fermented into wine. Fish from canals and rivers supplement grain-based diets. Sheep and goats yield milk transformed into cheese and yogurt. Meat appears rarely on common tables, reserved for festivals and offerings. Beer flows through Sumerian society at every level. Brewing represents household industry as much as temple enterprise. Women prepare the fermented barley beverage that provides calories, hydration, and mild intoxication. Drinking straws filter the thick liquid, allowing consumption without ingesting floating grain particles. Beer rations form part of worker compensation, measured in standardized vessels that bureaucrats record on administrative tablets. The agricultural calendar structures existence beyond city walls. Families maintain connections to rural land even when residing in urban centers. Planting season brings intensive labor as irrigation channels require clearing and fields demand preparation. Harvest time mobilizes entire communities in races against heat and pests that threaten stored grain. Canal maintenance represents collective obligation. The irrigation networks that make agriculture possible require constant attention, dredging accumulated silt, repairing breached banks, managing water distribution among competing users. Disputes over water rights generate legal conflicts that scribes record and judges adjudicate. Access to irrigation determines prosperity or ruin. Children enter adult responsibilities early. Boys accompany fathers to fields and workshops, learning skills through observation and gradual participation. Girls master domestic arts beside mothers and grandmothers. Formal education in tablet houses remains available only to select families who can spare sons from productive labor. Marriage arrangements follow economic logic as much as personal preference. Families negotiate unions that consolidate property, forge alliances, and ensure continuation of lineages. Brides bring dowries that remain their property throughout marriage. Divorce provisions protect women's economic interests, allowing return of dowry upon dissolution of unions. The rhythm of seasons, the demands of irrigation, the obligations of kinship, these forces shape lives lived largely beyond written record. The tablets preserve administrative transactions and literary compositions, but the texture of ordinary existence must be reconstructed from material remains. Broken pottery, worn grinding stones, and collapsed mud brick walls testify to countless lives lived in pursuit of sustenance, security, and continuity across generations. Yet knowledge in Sumer extends far beyond the practical matters of household and field. Within temple precincts and specialized chambers, scholar priests accumulate understanding of a different order entirely. They observe, measure, calculate, and record, building systematic knowledge that transforms human relationship with the natural world. The mathematical tablets reveal minds grappling with abstraction itself. Sumerian scribes develop a sexagesimal system, base 60, that proves remarkably versatile for calculation. This choice emerges from practical necessity. 60 divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. Making fractional calculations far simpler than decimal alternatives. The legacy persists into the present day through 60-second minutes and 60-minute hours, through 360 degrees in a circle. Multiplication tables fill countless practice tablets. Students memorizing relationships between numbers that enable rapid commercial calculation. Yet the mathematical enterprise extends beyond mere commerce. Geometric problems appear on tablets from Nippur and Uruk, demonstrating understanding of what later generations will call the Pythagorean theorem, more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras draws breath. Scribes calculate areas of irregular fields, volumes of granaries, diagonal measurements of rectangles. They work with square roots and cube roots, solving problems that require sophisticated algebraic thinking expressed in rhetorical rather than symbolic form. The astronomical observations accumulate across generations. Temple towers serve dual purposes: platforms for worship and elevated positions for watching the heavens. Priests track the movements of Venus with particular attention, recording appearances and disappearances of the morning and evening star across decades. These observations eventually produce the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, though that compilation lies centuries in the future. The foundations are laid now, in patient nightly vigils atop ziggurats. The lunar calendar governs religious and agricultural life, requiring constant adjustment to align with solar seasons. Priests develop intercalation methods, inserting additional months when necessary to prevent festivals from drifting through the year. This calendrical knowledge carries profound political significance. The authority to declare months and festivals reinforces temple power over civic life. Medical knowledge develops along parallel tracks. Therapeutic tablets distinguish between two approaches to healing. The Ashapu practices magical medicine, diagnosing illness through divination and treating through incantation and ritual. The ASU employs empirical methods, prescribing plant-based remedies, mineral treatments, and physical interventions. Both practitioners work within frameworks that understand disease as divine punishment, demonic possession, or sorcerous attack, yet the treatments themselves often demonstrate genuine pharmacological effectiveness. The medical texts catalog hundreds of plant substances. Willow bark appears in prescriptions for pain and fever, the same compound that modern chemistry will identify as salicylic acid, precursor to aspirin. Poppy preparations treat severe pain. Myrrh serves as antiseptic. The materia medica reflects centuries of accumulated observation about which substances produce which effects, even when theoretical explanations invoke supernatural causation. Surgical knowledge remains limited but present. Texts describe wound treatment, abscess drainage, and bone setting. Bronze instruments recovered from archaeological contexts suggest procedures more sophisticated than written records explicitly describe. The boundaries between medicine and magic blur constantly. A single treatment might combine herbal poultice with spoken incantation, addressing both physical and spiritual dimensions of illness. Diagnostic texts organize symptoms into recognizable patterns. If a patient exhibits certain combinations of fever, pain, and behavioral changes, the prognosis follows established precedent. These omen-based diagnostics accumulate predictive power through systematic observation, even when framed in supernatural terms. The priest-physician learns to recognize disease progressions, anticipate crises, and adjust treatments accordingly. The knowledge systems interconnect. Mathematical precision enables astronomical prediction. Astronomical observation determines auspicious times for medical treatment. Medical outcomes feed back into omen collections that guide future practice. Temple archives preserve this accumulated wisdom across generations, creating institutional memory that transcends individual lifespans. The scholar priests who maintain these records understand themselves as custodians of knowledge that connects humanity to cosmic order itself. Yet the cosmic order that temple scholars so carefully chart cannot prevent the earthly disruptions now gathering force beyond Sumer's borders. Around 2004 before the Common Era, the third dynasty of faces pressures that no mathematical calculation can resolve, no omen can deflect. From the western deserts and the middle Euphrates region, Amorite peoples move steadily eastward, drawn by the fertile lands and wealthy cities that Sumerian civilization has cultivated for millennia. The defensive response comes in monumental form. King Shu-Sin constructs a massive wall stretching between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a barrier intended to hold back the pastoral nomads pressing against Sumer's northwestern frontier. Administrative tablets record the wall's construction with typical bureaucratic precision: labor conscriptions, material allocations, garrison assignments. The structure bears the name Repeller of the Amorites, a designation that reveals both its purpose and the anxiety driving its creation. The wall proves inadequate. Amorite groups filter around its endpoints, settle in peripheral territories, and gradually penetrate deeper into the Sumerian heartland. These newcomers speak a Semitic language distinct from both Sumerian and Akkadian. They organize in tribal confederations led by chieftains rather than in the urban hierarchies that define Sumerian political life. Their pastoral economy emphasizes sheep and goat herding over the intensive agriculture that sustains Sumerian cities. Ur's final decades unfold under mounting pressure. King Ibbi-Sin inherits a realm already fragmenting. Provincial governors declare independence. Tribute payments cease arriving. The administrative system that once coordinated resources across dozens of cities breaks down as communication networks collapse. Grain shipments that fed the capital dwindle, then stop entirely. The Elamites deliver the final blow. Around 2004, before the Common Era, forces from the eastern highlands breach Ur's defenses, sack the city, and carry Ibbi-Sin himself into captivity. The great ziggurat still rises above the destruction, but the temples fall silent. Administrative archives cease recording transactions. The bureaucratic state that represented Sumerian civilization's highest organizational achievement dissolves within a single generation. The physical evidence of collapse accumulates in archaeological layers. Residential quarters show signs of abandonment, household goods left behind, cooking fires gone cold, doorways blocked with debris. Public buildings suffer systematic looting. The canal systems that sustained intensive agriculture fall into disrepair as the labor forces that maintain them disperse. Salt accumulation in poorly drained fields accelerates, rendering once productive land increasingly barren. Population movements reshape the demographic landscape. Urban residents scatter to smaller towns and villages. Some flee southward toward the Persian Gulf marshlands. Others migrate northward, seeking security in cities less exposed to raiding. The great urban centers that defined Sumerian civilization, Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, contract dramatically. Streets that once bustled with commercial activity grow quiet. Temple precincts that employed thousands of workers operate with skeleton staffs. Yet, cultural continuity persists beneath political rupture. Amorite chieftains who establish themselves in former Sumerian cities adopt local traditions. They commission temples to Sumerian gods. They employ scribes trained in cuneiform writing. They preserve literary texts and administrative practices developed over centuries. The newcomers absorb Sumerian civilization even as they transform it. The transition produces hybrid forms. Amorite personal names appear alongside Sumerian divine names in religious texts. Tribal political structures merge with urban administrative traditions. Pastoral and agricultural economies interweave as settled farmers and mobile herders develop complementary relationships. The rigid boundaries that once separated Sumerian from outsider blur and dissolve. Small kingdoms emerge from the wreckage of the Ur state. Isin and Larsa compete for supremacy in the south. Eshnunna rises in the Diyala region. Assur grows powerful in the north. Each claims legitimacy through connection to Sumerian precedent while adapting to new political realities. The Sumerian language retreats from daily speech, but survives in religious and scholarly contexts, becoming a classical tongue preserved by educated elites. The transformation accelerates through the 19th century before the Common Era. Babylon, once an insignificant town on the Euphrates, begins its ascent toward dominance. Its Amorite rulers adopt Sumerian administrative practices wholesale, employing scribes trained in the ancient cuneiform tradition. Temple complexes rise following architectural patterns established 2,000 years earlier at Eridu and Uruk. The newcomers do not destroy Sumerian civilization. They absorb it completely. Scribal schools multiply throughout the emerging Babylonian state. Young students copy Sumerian literary texts with painstaking care, learning a language no longer spoken in marketplaces or homes. The Epic of Gilgamesh receives new recensions, its ancient Sumerian core wrapped in Akkadian verses that carry the tale to wider audiences. Inanna becomes Ishtar. Utu transforms into Shamash. The gods change names but retain their essential characters, their myths, their cosmic functions. Legal traditions flow unbroken from Ur-Nammu through successive generations. When Hammurabi of Babylon compiles his famous law code around 1750 before the Common Era, he draws upon centuries of Sumerian jurisprudence. The principle of written law publicly displayed, the organization of cases by category, the concern for protecting widows and orphans from exploitation, all derive from Sumerian precedent. Hammurabi acknowledges this debt, styling himself as a shepherd of his people in language borrowed directly from Ur's royal inscriptions. Mathematical knowledge passes intact through the cultural transition. Babylonian astronomers inherit the sexagesimal system that Sumerian temple administrators developed for accounting purposes. The division of circles into 360 degrees, hours into 60 minutes, minutes into 60 seconds. These conventions travel from Sumerian counting houses into Babylonian observatories and eventually into every civilization that follows. Temple economies adapt rather than disappear. The great religious institutions retain their land holdings, their workshops, their administrative hierarchies. Priests continue recording offerings in cuneiform, tracking lunar cycles, performing rituals whose origins stretch back to the marshland shrines of the Ubaid period. The sacred marriage ceremony persists, kings ritually wedding goddesses to ensure cosmic fertility. Religious conservatism preserves Sumerian practice within Babylonian frameworks. Yet, genuine transformation accompanies this preservation. Akkadian definitively replaces Sumerian as the language of government, commerce, and daily life. Sumerian survives only as a scholarly and liturgical tongue, studied by educated elites much as medieval Europeans studied Latin. The ethnic identity that once distinguished Sumerians from their neighbors dissolves entirely. Populations intermarry across generations until the distinction becomes meaningless. Political geography shifts permanently northward. Babylon's central location proves advantageous for controlling trade routes connecting the Persian Gulf with Syria and Anatolia. The southern cities that once dominated Mesopotamian civilization become provincial backwaters. Uruk, Eridu, these ancient centers continue as religious pilgrimage sites but lose their political significance. The marshlands that birthed civilization return to quieter rhythms. Hammurabi's conquests unite Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule, creating an empire that consciously models itself on Akkadian and Ur precedents. His scribes compile king lists connecting his dynasty to the legendary rulers of Kish and Uruk. His monuments employ artistic conventions developed in Sumerian workshops. His hymns praise gods using epithets composed in Sumerian temples centuries earlier. The absorption is complete. Sumerian civilization does not die in this transformation. It metamorphoses into something new, while its essential achievements survive within Babylonian culture. The wheel continues turning, the plow continues breaking earth, cuneiform continues recording human thought. The patterns established in those first cities along the Euphrates prove too valuable, too fundamental to abandon. They simply acquire new names, new contexts, new inheritors who carry them forward through millennia yet to come. Those inheritors carry Sumerian achievements across centuries and continents, often without knowing the source of what they transmit. The Babylonians who absorb Sumerian culture pass it to the Assyrians, who spread it throughout their vast empire. Persian conquerors encounter these traditions and incorporate them into their own administrative systems. Greek scholars visiting Babylon in the 4th century, before the Common Era, encounter astronomical records stretching back over 1,000 years. Mathematical techniques of remarkable sophistication, and literary traditions of profound depth. The transmission continues through channels both visible and hidden. Hebrew scribes composing sacred texts draw upon Mesopotamian flood narratives, creation accounts, and legal formulations. The story of a righteous man building a boat to survive divine deluge echoes the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, preserved through Babylonian versions that reach Mediterranean cultures through trade and conquest. Legal principles first codified in Sumerian cities appear transformed in biblical law codes, carrying forward concepts of justice articulated in the shadow of ziggurats. Mathematical knowledge proves equally persistent. The Sumerian decision to count in base 60 survives in every clock face, every geometric calculation, every navigational chart. 60 seconds compose each minute. 60 minutes compose each hour. 360 degrees divide the circle. These conventions, established by scribes pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets, become so fundamental that later civilizations forget they ever had alternatives. The wheel rolls forward through every subsequent culture. The plow breaks soil across every agricultural civilization. The sailboat catches wind on every navigable water. Writing itself, that revolutionary technology first developed to track temple offerings, transforms into alphabets and scripts that enable every literate society that follows. The Sumerian invention of recording human thought in permanent form makes possible every book, every archive, every accumulated body of knowledge that distinguishes civilization from its absence. Yet, for nearly 2,000 years, Sumer itself vanishes from human memory. The cities crumble into tells, artificial hills rising from flat plains. Sand and silt bury the ziggurat foundations. Local populations forget that beneath their feet lie the remains of humanity's first urban experiment. The very name Sumer disappears from historical consciousness, known only through fragmentary references in biblical texts and classical authors who themselves understood little of what they mentioned. Rediscovery begins in the 19th century of the Common Era. European archaeologists, initially seeking biblical confirmation, excavate Mesopotamian sites and encounter something far older than they anticipated. At Nineveh, Austin Henry Layard uncovers Assyrian palaces containing libraries of clay tablets. Among these tablets, scholars gradually recognize texts in an unknown language predating Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian. The language proves to be Sumerian, and its decipherment opens windows onto a civilization previously unknown to modern humanity. Excavations multiply across southern Iraq. Leonard Woolley's work at in the 1920s reveals the royal tombs with their golden treasures and sacrificial attendants. German teams at Uruk uncover the Iana precinct and the earliest known writing. French archaeologists at Lagash and Girsu recover thousands of administrative tablets documenting temple economies in extraordinary detail. Each season of digging adds new dimensions to understanding of this foundational civilization. The tablets themselves speak across millennia. Schoolboy exercises reveal educational methods. Love poems express emotions recognizable across 4,000 years. Administrative records document the daily operations of complex institutions. Royal hymns proclaim the achievements of kings whose names had been forgotten for 2,000 years. The Sumerian voice, silenced for so long, speaks again through the patient work of scholars who learn to read cuneiform signs. Museum collections now preserve these voices for future generations. The British Museum, the Louvre, the University of Pennsylvania, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, and dozens of other institutions hold tablets, cylinder seals, sculptures, and artifacts that testify to Sumerian achievement. Each object represents a connection to those first city builders who transformed human possibility along the banks of the Euphrates. The legacy endures in ways both tangible and invisible. Every time a wheel turns, every time a farmer guides a plow, every time someone checks the hour, the Sumerian inheritance manifests itself. The patterns established in those reed-built villages that became the world's first cities continue shaping human experience. Sumer may have vanished as a political entity 4,000 years ago, but its fundamental contributions remain woven into the fabric of civilization itself. Thank you for journeying through the complete history of humanity's first civilization. If these stories of ancient Sumer have illuminated the origins of our shared human heritage, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss our future explorations into the remarkable worlds that shaped our own.